All right, welcome back, Powers on Sports podcast. Now we are going to focus our attention on probably the best conference in college football through 3 weeks, 8 teams in the top 25. You got storylines all over the West Coast, from Deion to Caleb Williams to Utah to up in the Pacific Northwest with Washington State and Oregon State, and no better person to talk all things Pac-12 as well as college football in general than my guy Matt Zemek from out in Phoenix. He is the editor of USA Today's Trojan Wire. His focus is on USC football and athletics, but he covers all things Pac-12 and college football. So, Mr. Zemek, welcome back, my man.
Always great to be on your show, Jason.
All right, let's start with the storyline of all storylines out your way. Let's talk Deion out in Colorado. They escaped with the game at Colorado State over the weekend. A little bit of controversy. You had the late hit on the late hit that's being deemed a dirty play by Colorado State against Travis Hunter, who's going to be out several weeks. And then you have a play that I think has kind of got underplayed a little bit. Shedeur Sanders pokes the guy in the eye for Colorado State, and I've not heard a lot of talk about that. And to me, that's just as dirty as what allegedly the Colorado State guy did to Travis Hunter. Your thoughts just on the whole Deion phenomenon out your way, and kind of more specifically in that game in general as Colorado moves to 3-0?
Well, everyone wants a piece of Deion, and we know that he's a megawatt figure, and he increases the electricity in the room when he's there, and he'll say quotable things. But as much as we all know that on a general level, it's still really surprising to me how much this thing has taken off. And obviously going 3-0 has helped, but let's dial it back a little bit. TCU wasn't supposed to be particularly great. Now, I thought TCU would win that game comfortably, but TCU looked really bad, and TCU seems to have a lot of problems going forward in the Big 12. And then, of course, Nebraska. What an absolute disaster. What a smoking freighter at quarterback with Jeff Sims. You'd think Matt Rule could get a better quarterback in the portal. Nebraska's QB situation is abysmal. So, and of course, Colorado was favored going into that game during the week. Now, of course, in early August, when, the preseason lines were out, Nebraska was an 8.5-point favorite. But, of course, that all changed in week 1. We knew that. So, it was surprising that Colorado went 2-0 relative to preseason expectations. But most people were thinking Colorado was going to beat Nebraska when game week arrived. So in many ways, just the TCU game was really surprising. And then this Colorado State game, this is what we thought Colorado was going to look like before the season began. In July and August, this is what we thought it was going to be like for Colorado, because you saw the lack of strength up front. Colorado State was able to manage this game up front. Colorado not able to run the ball against a Mountain West defensive line. And Shedeur Sanders was pretty ordinary for most of this game. He was just immediately dumping everything off. He wasn't looking down the field. No thought of, trying to buy time. He didn't start scrambling. He didn't start using his legs until the fourth quarter when Colorado was down 11 points. So only when things got desperate did he finally do that. And that should have been there earlier in the game. And we sometimes see this where you're locked into one mode or one way of doing things. And then only when things get really serious, fourth quarter, trailing by 2 scores, do teams finally get a little bit of urgency. I think a lot of teams with struggling offenses, whether in general or just because of early season rust, they should be going with no huddle all the time. How many times do we see this? You go to no huddle, and what was a sputtering offense suddenly comes alive, partly because the players are no longer thinking. They're just automatically, just snap the ball, play, just play ball, just turn off the voices in your head, just go out and play, do what you naturally do. When you stop thinking, and also when you don't give the defense a chance to set up, great things can happen. So, doing the no huddle offense in the fourth quarter, that shook things loose for Colorado. And that's when Shedeur Sanders finally started playing up to his capabilities and was brilliant on that final 98-yard tying drive late in regulation. And then Sean Lewis, who really had, Deion Sanders is, gets credit and he deserves it for what he's doing at Colorado. But he has to hire the right people around him.
Right.
Much like Dabo at Clemson, he hired Chad Morris and he hired Brent Venables. If he doesn't make those hires, Clemson doesn't get off the ground and become the dynasty that it did in the middle of the past decade. So Deion, by hiring Sean Lewis from Kent State, that was a coup. That was a real great hire. It's paying dividends. You saw in the tying 2-point play, just great play design, stretching Colorado State wide and then getting the tight end and the seam up the middle, just, pulling the defense apart and then finding an opening. Just great play design on that 2-point conversion. But, so stepping back, Colorado State, before the season, Colorado State figured to be the first of the 3 that Colorado was going to win. And yet that turned out to be Colorado's toughest game. So it's partly a commentary on TCU and Nebraska, but it's also a commentary on the limitations that really do exist with this Colorado team. Undersized up front, not having a whole lot of depth on defense. This game really exposed Colorado. And as much as Deion is, the flavor of the month, he went on 60 Minutes on Sunday. He's done 2 60 Minutes interviews in 2 years. One when he was at Jackson State, one when he's at Colorado.
Yep. I
mean, for 60 minutes, that's a little bit of overkill. Could we at least wait until Deion makes the college football playoff to do a second interview with him? Okay.
It's called ratings, Matt. It's called ratings.
So I guess they're going to do a third interview with Deion if he makes the college football playoff in a couple of years. Anyway, back to the main story. So Colorado's been exposed. But they're 3-0, and because ASU and Stanford exist, and those are 2 horrible teams. Stanford because just everything's been hollowed out, and you have a coaching change. ASU has 20 players hurt. And ASU is going to be playing the 4th string quarterback against USC this week. Good luck with that. Colorado should be able to beat Stanford and Arizona State in its sleep. And so right there you have 5 wins. So really, Colorado just needs to win 1 game against a middle tier team in the Pac-12, and it's going to go to a bowl. And that's just a phenomenal year 1 result. But what this Colorado State game did, Jason, it cooled off the talk of, oh, this is a Pac-12 contender. No way. Colorado's going to get boat raced these next 2 weeks by Oregon and USC.
And we're going to talk about that here in a second as part of the big slate of kind of ranked matchups this week around the country. I want to talk coaching decisions, a couple things in that Colorado game, and then another decision in the Florida State Boston College game. First of all, Colorado State. You're Jay Norvell. You're about to pull off a big upset here and get all the national attention on you and off of Deion. You have 2 chances in this game to ice the game. One at 4th and 2, you're up 8 points at about the 2-minute warning, and you don't go for it on Colorado's 41, 42-yard line. How you don't go for it there, you're up 8. Even if you don't make it, they still have to go 60 yards, score, and make a 2-point conversion. You have to go for it there on the road to try to ice the game. You don't do that. Shedeur Sanders goes 98 yards, makes the 2-point conversion. Then in overtime, you've just absorbed a touchdown. Now you have another opportunity. You've scored quickly. You've got all the momentum, and you don't go for 2 there. I was stunned that he didn't go for the win in one of those 2 opportunities.
I was stunned too. And so a couple things. First off, it's an in-state rivalry.
Yes.
So it's a rivalry game. You should just be going for it just because it's a rivalry game. And we're here to win, and we're here to be aggressive. Fire up your players. Just on that in that context alone, he should be going for it.
And you were up 8. You're up 8, and in no danger of losing the game in regulation.
That's right.
Worst.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. That's another part. The other part, though, is of course all the smack talk during the week with Deion. If you're talking smack, you're not going to back it up. You're going to start playing it safe. That makes no sense.
Right.
And the third part is if you take it to Deion, that's just a windfall for your recruiting and how you market your program.
Yep.
So it's a selling point for what you're trying to do at Colorado State. 4th is what you mentioned about the 8-point lead. You're in absolutely no danger of losing the game in regulation. So you have a certain degree of cushion, even if you fail. And the 5th point, and this is the most specifically tactical element of all of this, Jason, just in terms of tactics, what had Colorado State been doing well all night long? short passes. I mean, they were just dinking and dunking them to death with 5-yard passes in the short flat, usually to the right side of the field, whether it was the tight ends, the running backs, the receivers. A 4 or 5-yard pass to a guy running in space with a linebacker well out of position. Colorado never adjusted. Colorado was playing guys back and was playing guys deep. They were throwing underneath, never really adjusted. Like, that was just cash money for Colorado.
And you could have run the ball on 4th and 2. You could have run the ball 4th and 2 as well.
Well, you could have, but like your best play was a short pass. Exactly what 4th and 2 is, and then a 2-point conversion would demand. Like, that's your wheelhouse. Like, it played to your strengths, and you're not doing it. That's I mean, lots of things were stunning about those 2 acts of coaching cowardice by Jay Norvell, but that was the biggest one. That short pass, exactly what you do on 4th and 2. Why wouldn't you then do it one more time? Just absolutely mind-blowing.
And the other one I want to go to is Florida State, Boston College, Jeff Hafley. They're down 31-16 with about 8 minutes to go in the game. They strip the ball from the running back, run the ball in for a touchdown. It's now 31-22, 9-point differential, 8 minutes to go in the game. You cannot, I don't care how much you believe in it, at that moment, at 8 minutes left in the game, you cannot go for 2 points there if you're Jeff Hafley. You have to kick the extra point to get within 8 points to give yourself an opportunity where one more score can tie the game with a 2-point conversion. You don't make it. You're down 9 with 8 minutes to go. And guess what you end up doing? You score another touchdown later, and now you can't tie the game. You're down 9, so you have to kick the extra point to get down 2. They lose the game by 2 points. I think just ridiculous coaching by Jeff Hafley with 8 minutes left in the game. Third quarter, you want to go for 2, I can live with that. With 8 minutes left in the game and minimal possessions, you have got to kick the extra point to get within 8 points against when you're overmatched, which they are against Florida State.
I think that's a fair point, but I will say in this particular instance and with this part of, the coaching calculus in general, you're going to have to get a 2-pointer at some point. So it's not.
But when you don't make it the first time, that means you have to score 2 more times.
Of course, but down 15, you need an 8 and a 7. So you are going to need a 2-pointer at some point. So it's not as though, like, to me, Jason, just in terms of coaching philosophy and tactics, it's a lot worse when you chase a point midway through the game because there's so many more scenarios to play out over the remaining 10, 20, 40, whatever minutes. That is much worse than what Hafley did. Now I'm not saying like it was a great call, but I'm saying you can certainly defend that decision.
Not with 8 minutes left in the game. Not with 8 minutes left in the game, Matt.
Indefensible decision because you're going to need 8 points. You're going to need a snowman at some point.
Yep.
And he just wanted to go for it earlier. So, like, I'm not saying it's a great move, but like just on the pecking order of really bad decisions, that's not the worst of the worst.
Norvell gets the gold and the silver medal for sure on bad decisions. We'll give Hafley the bronze, but
that's fair. That's fair. That's fair. But I completely understand. Like, you're trying to keep your team in the game. That's one of the things coaches need to do. And when you make that move, you risk taking your team out of the game. That point is clear.
Let's go back to the Pac-12. Talk about the strength and depth of the Pac-12. 8 in the top 25. What a year they have, and it's so unfortunate. This is the last run for this conference. But again, from top to bottom, you've got 8 teams that are loaded. Obviously you have a couple of weak teams with Arizona State and Cal. Cal's actually not bad, but Stanford's really bad. Just talk about from Washington State and Oregon State. You got USC, you got Utah's good. UCLA's kind of laying in the weeds there a little bit. And talk about just the strength of the conference.
Yeah, so a number of really interesting points. First off, the conference went 29-5 in non-conference games. And of those 5 losses, 2 are by Arizona State, which is a horrible team. And it's not a reflection on the coaching. It's that, again, Arizona State has like almost 24 people hurt.
Full rebuild. Full rebuild. And
you also have a full rebuild at Stanford. They have a great 2024 recruiting class coming in. but this year it's going to be a lot of pain and suffering.
Right.
So 3 of the 5 losses by the 2 worst teams going through total rebuilds under first-year coaches. The other 2 losses, Arizona taking Mississippi State to overtime on the road. So that was a good performance.
Yep.
And then Cal outplayed Auburn, but missed 3 field goals and lost by 4 points. So there was not a single non-conference game in which the Pac-12 really slipped on the banana peel. The possible exception being Cal, but Cal did play better than Auburn for most of that night. Just Cal's field goal kicker sucked. That was really the only bad moment from Pac-12 non-conference play. And so teams up and down the line were able to do their job. Most notably, Washington State beating Wisconsin and Luke Fickell. That was not expected to happen. And, other teams, Colorado being the other obvious, step up team, a team that was better than expected as well. But now here's the word of caution for the Pac-12. As good as these first 3 weeks were, now we get to conference season. And what do we have a lot of in the Pac-12? We have quality quarterback play.
Yes.
And a lot of the Pac-12 teams that went unbeaten, and there are 8 of them, as you mentioned, what common thread runs through those 8 teams? They have not played good quarterbacks.
Right.
Utah barely beat Baylor. Baylor had a backup quarterback.
Right.
And Washington certainly didn't face good quarterback play against Michigan State. USC's played terrible teams. Stanford, also Nevada. Nevada lost by 27 at home to Idaho. You go San Diego State, UCLA, and Oregon State both beat San Diego State. San Diego State's offense is terrible.
Right.
So you go up and down the line in the conference. That teams have not seen good quarterbacks. And so now they're going to go up against good quarterbacks, good offenses. And, what really is the best case scenario for the conference? Well, it's kind of complicated, but I would say that, you definitely want 4 teams with 10 wins, because last year the conference was able to get 4 teams with 10 wins. UCLA came really close, but slipped on a rake in the Sun Bowl against Pitt. Would have made it 5 10-win teams. So you want 4 10-win teams, I would say. And then of those 4 10-win teams, one of them finds a way to get into the playoff. I think that's basically what you're looking for if you're the Pac-12. And then you want teams, 5 through 8 to all get to decent bowl games, win 8 games or so. If you have 8 teams winning 8 games, that's really good. And that would be hard for any other conference to match, especially since the SEC had such a bad non-conference run. So that teams are going to beat each other up to a certain point, but obviously, you want that win distribution to be balanced enough that everyone kind of shares in the riches. And then it's hard to make that happen as a collective. Each team's on its own path, its own journey, but that really would be the best scenario for the Pac-12, trying to plot this thing out the next 2.5 months.
Is it better for the conference? I hate to say this, that they don't cannibalize themselves, that 2 or 3 teams emerge to where they're gonna, because you're not going to get a 2-loss team in the playoff most likely.
Nope.
Do you want a scenario where the best 3 teams, whether it's USC, whoever else, the other 2 teams you want to pick, get to 10-1, where the last week of the season you're almost guaranteed somebody's going to get to the title game with only 1 loss, as opposed to them all beating each other and everybody ends up with 2 losses at the end, which is going to knock them out?
Yeah, if you have 11-1 USC against 11-1 Washington in the Pac-12 championship game, and then you have a couple 10-2 teams, or maybe if you have 11-1 USC against 11-1 Washington, that might mean that you get one more 9-3 team,
UCLA,
and one less
or
10-2 team. You'll take that trade-off if that's the price you have to pay. Okay, so we had only 3 10-win teams instead of 4. Fine. If that's what it means, if that's what it takes to get 2 11-1 teams to Las Vegas, with the winner going to the college football playoff, yeah, you definitely take that. And just in terms of the playoff, I mean, it's only September, but
correct,
the Pac-12 had to like what it saw this past weekend with Texas.
Yep.
Stumbling against Wyoming. I mean, not losing, but that really dialed down the hype about
Georgia
Texas.
struggling.
Bama
struggling.
Yep, and Florida State. State as well. like the idea that Florida State and Texas are both going to go unbeaten, that, going into week 3, that seemed like a really strong possibility. Now it seems like a lot less of a possibility. Could still happen, but you'd put much lower odds on that happening right now. And I would also say the SEC is almost certain to be a 1-bid league.
Right.
Like, because Alabama, first off, with Alabama, and like my one major preseason prediction that some people might have disagreed with was that Alabama was going to lose at least 3 games. Well, I might have underestimated. I'm going to say Alabama loses at least 4 games with that offense. Go ahead.
I was in the building Saturday against USF, and their quarterback
you're based
play.
In Tampa. That's right.
Their quarterback play is pitiful. And give Saban credit. He came out today we're doing this on Monday night. He named Milroe the starter, who didn't play it all Saturday. He's the best of the 3, but he ain't great by any means.
That's right. He's clearly the best, and he's just as clearly not all that special.
Right.
You compare him to Bryce Young, you compare him to Mac Jones, you compare him to Tua. He's well below that Alabama standard of the past
Blake
years.
Sims. He's Blake Sims. No, I mean, seriously.
Yes.
That's what that's about what he is.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So Alabama's going to lose at least 4 times, and LSU already has a loss. And of course, so beating Alabama is not going to have the same value this year that it would have in previous seasons. So it's looking very likely that the SEC is going to get just 1 team in. So really, if you're the Pac-12, you need at least one of Texas or Florida State to stumble, because if those 2 teams get in, that really narrows the gap, because you're going to have the Big Ten there. So you have SEC, Big Ten, Texas, Florida State. That would lock the Pac-12 out, unless the conference champion is 13-0, but that's not likely in a conference that this deep. If the Pac-12 does get in, it's going to be with a 12-1 conference champion. So you definitely need at least one of Texas or Florida State to lose. And if that happens, then the Pac-12 odds are pretty good, because the strength of schedule is going to be very good for them compared to the Big 12 and the ACC.
But I will say this, if Texas and Florida State can probably absorb 1 loss, because going on the road and winning at Alabama, beating LSU on a neutral site, and they'll probably have beaten Clemson. So I think they can absorb 1 loss. They probably don't have to run the table, but you can't lose twice. And to me, if USC or whoever comes out of the Pac-12 has 1 loss, that's going to be a hell of a debate if all those teams have 1 loss, because you're going to have a Big Ten team with 1 loss, most likely, because Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State at some point are going to play each other, whether it's regular season or the Big Ten title game.
That's right. Well, so with Florida State, that's the interesting one, because, Texas winning at Alabama, that loss is going to that win is going to lose value over the course of the season, I think. Florida State is the tougher
beating LSU
study, because that LSU win is probably going to retain value.
Yep.
But Clemson already having lost to Duke, that's definitely favorable for the Pac-12, because beating Clemson is not going to mean quite what it did. But if Florida State is 12-1 with wins over LSU and Clemson, that's going to be a formidable resume. And then it would really come down to
Miami,
Washington,
and you have a potential Florida State beating Miami and I know Florida's not great, but
Miami has to prove itself.
That's true. That's true. You're right. But if they can get to that game with 1 loss, and Florida State can beat Miami,
no, 12-1 Florida State will be a problem for the Pac-12 if we get that scenario. No doubt about that. And then it would come down to, do Washington, Oregon, Utah, do they hold up their end of the bargain? Are they 10-win teams? Are they having strong seasons?
Right.
Because then, going 2-1. Remember, all 4 of those projected top teams, USC, Washington, Oregon, Utah, they all play each other. No skips. There are no gaps there. They all play each other. So if you go 2-1 against that threesome, you're going to make the Pac-12 championship game, and you're going to be in that mix for the conference title. If all those teams are really good, then going 2-1 against that trio looks good on paper. And then for USC specifically, USC has that road game at Notre Dame. And so if USC has a Notre Dame, Washington, and then either Oregon or Utah
wins,
three high-end wins in its pocket,
they're good.
That can match up pretty favorably with Florida State 12-1 and having Clemson and LSU.
And the other, like you make the great wild card team is Notre Dame. If they were to beat Ohio State but lose to
Yes.
USC and run the table, then you got another set of debates that you got to weigh.
And that Notre Dame Clemson game later in the year,
elimination
like
game.
Florida State's gonna really need Clemson, and USC is gonna really need Notre Dame to win that game.
All right, two more things. We'll get you out of here. Look at the Matt Zemek, USA Today editor of Trojan Wire, covers all things USC as well as covers a lot of Pac-12 stuff. Give me the state of USC. Obviously, we know the prolific offense it's got with Caleb Williams and all the offensive. Again, they've played nobody, so you can't really measure what they're doing. Give me a synopsis of USC, especially defensively. Do you see a scenario where they can get through this schedule of the gauntlet of who they got plus Notre Dame with one loss with the defensive woes that it looks like they still have?
So, much as what I was saying about the Pac-12 in general, it definitely applies to USC. Like USC hasn't played a good offense. USC hasn't faced a good quarterback yet. And so, it really, we're going to find out a little bit against Shedeur Sanders in Colorado on September 30, but we're really going to find out. Like the first really big test is going to be against Notre Dame on October 14th, Sam Hartman in South Bend.
Yep.
And so in light of this larger challenge, like USC has a really nasty backloaded schedule. The back end is really tough. Like USC is going to play Notre Dame, Utah, Washington, and Oregon. 4 elite teams, or at least 4 projected elite teams.
Where's the Washington and Oregon game at?
Washington game is in Los Angeles. The Oregon game's in Eugene at Autzen Stadium. But 4 really tough games in 5 weeks. And USC is going to need to win 3 of those 4 really tough games to be in the playoff hunt.
And real quick. Didn't I see they don't have a bye till the end of the year too? They play like 11 straight games or something like that.
Yeah, so they were off this weekend, and now they play 9 straight weeks through November 18th. Wow. Yes. So that's the bad news. It's a backloaded schedule without any rest breaks. That's the bad news. But the good news is, Arizona State, as I mentioned, that's their next opponent.
That's a layup.
Arizona State has Arizona State has like almost 2 dozen players injured. Like that's going to be another basically a preseason game.
Yeah.
Like these first 3 games against San Jose State, Nevada, and Stanford, they're basically preseason games. And the USC staff, and I talked about this on my USC show on YouTube in the off season, but like the first half of the season is all about, giving a large workload to the backups and the second and third stringers, giving your freshmen a lot of playing time and doing some program building and trying to create depth. And making sure that your starters have a minimal workload going into the Notre Dame, Utah, Washington, Oregon gauntlet. So the reality attached to Arizona State being, completely hollowed out by injuries, USC basically gets another week in which to just rotate bodies. Like USC does not need to lean on its starters for this Arizona State game. And against Colorado won't have Travis Hunter, and that's a huge loss. That game might be tricky for USC. It's going to be an early game. It's going to start just after 10 a.m.
Is it really? Is that going to be the Fox game?
Fox Big Noon Saturday.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So 9 a.m. game Pacific time for those body clocks at USC. That might be a little tricky, but without Travis Hunter, it's going to be hard for Colorado to win that game. So, and then there's Arizona on October 7th. So like USC right now, USC really does seem to have 3 more weeks in which it can rest its starters, rotate players. And so you're having to play 9 straight weeks, right? You need to keep your starters fresh. Right. You need to have enough fuel in the tank for the bigger games later in the season. And so one of the big questions entering this season was, would USC be able to keep its guys fresh in the first 6 games so that they'd be ready physically for the last 6 games?
Right.
So far, that's very much on course. This coaching staff has been good about just evenly distributing the snap counts. That needs to continue for the next few weeks. And if so, USC can overcome, just the logistical difficulty of having to play 9 straight weeks, most of those weeks against really good teams once we get into mid-October.
No, that's excellent. That's an excellent point because they've got a gauntlet they've got to go through, and again, that conference is going to be rough. And with Penix doing what he's doing at Washington, obviously we got Oregon, who we know that's going to be strong with Nix and Lanning and all those guys, and it's going to be key. And we will need to go into it in depth, but where these Pac-12 games are at is going to be huge. In Autzen, in Seattle, in the Coliseum, home field advantage will be critical in these matchups in the Pac-12.
Yep, let's go through that.
Even Wazoo and Oregon State are tricky places to go play for these warm weather teams.
Yeah, let's just briefly hit on that because that's a great topic since the Pac-12 conference play is starting. This weekend, you have 3 games involving 2 top 25 teams playing each other. Ranked team versus ranked team. Colorado, Oregon is ranked versus ranked team.
Yep.
Oregon State, Washington State, ranked versus ranked. And UCLA, Utah, ranked team versus ranked team. So 3 showcase games, all with the top 25. One thing that could really help USC over the course of this season, USC does not play either Oregon State or Washington State.
Right.
Utah has to play Oregon State. Oregon has to play Oregon State. Washington has to play Oregon State. USC does not. That could make the difference in terms of who gets to Las Vegas for the Pac-12 championship game and who doesn't. And Oregon is really in the tricky spot in terms of home versus road. Oregon has to go to Washington on October 14, then it has to go to Utah, to Salt Lake City on October 28. Now, Oregon does get USC at home, but remember when I talked about, all 4 of the top teams playing each other? So Oregon's a team that has to play 2 of those 3 big games away from home. USC's getting 2 of those 3 games at home. Washington's getting 2 of 3 at home. Utah is playing 2 of the 3 on the road. Utah is at Washington and at USC and gets Oregon at home. So if just for that scheduling piece, that's the division in terms of who's getting 2 out of 3 at home, who's getting 2 out of 3 on the road in those high-end Pac-12 games that are going to decide the conference title.
All right, just a snapshot in time. And I'll hold you to it. We can put it in pencil. Who through 3 weeks? Who's the best team in the Pac-12 today?
Today, it's Washington. Washington's just been brutalizing folks left and right and has played tougher opponents than USC. But USC looks good on in terms of just doing what an elite team is supposed to do. Like you should be up 49-3 at halftime against Stanford. So USC's doing what it's supposed to do. But Washington's had a higher degree of difficulty, although not by a lot. Like Michigan State doesn't look good, but Michigan State's better than Stanford. So you go Washington 1, USC 2. And then you might make Oregon State 3rd. That defense looks really nasty. And then Utah, that Florida win looks a lot better for Utah after what the Gators did to Tennessee.
All right, so I'm gonna put you on the clock here. We're gonna do a couple predictions here and get you out of here. We've got a bunch of big matchups. I know you do some work with Big Ten coverage and stuff, and also Matt is part of the College Gridiron Coast to Coast podcast feed, which is my Florida Football Insiders podcast is part of that. Matt's Get Off My Pylon is also a part of that podcast feed, so definitely check out the Get Off My Pylon podcast that Matt highlights and takes and hosts every week. Again, college Coast to Coast Gridiron, College Gridiron Coast to Coast podcast feed is the place you can find a bunch of different podcasts from all over the country. I do one in Florida. Matt handles the West Coast. We got one on the service academies, the ACC. A lot of great podcast information on that platform, so definitely check it out. All right. Tell me who give me a winner. No in depth, just give me a winner. Oregon, Colorado. Is it even competitive?
It's not competitive. Oregon.
All right. Give me Oregon State, Washington State.
Oregon State.
Okay, that's at at Wazoo?
Pullman. It's in Pullman, I believe. Yeah.
All right, and then give me who you tell me USC and who this UCLA.
UCLA
in
at
Salt
Utah.
Lake City.
UCLA at Utah. Give me the Utes. Cam Rising probably is going to play. Don't know that for sure, but he should be healthy by now. But assuming he plays, Utah definitely over UCLA.
Death Valley and Clemson. Florida State heads to Clemson.
Florida State.
I agree. And then the big one in South Bend, you got the showdown. Ohio State hasn't been there, I think, 30 years, something like that. Notre Dame, Ohio State. Again, Notre Dame's got some guys back. Sam Hartman. You finally got a quarterback situation a little bit stabilized at Ohio State with McCord. Who do you like in South Bend?
Okay, first off, I don't have a strong feel about this game, but if you said you got to pick one, I'm going to pick Notre Dame because of the veteran quarterback.
I'm
and
with you.
That position's going to decide it, and it's in South Bend.
I do. I agree. Night game at South Bend. I like Sam Hartman in that spot. 3 starters coming back for Notre Dame. I'm with you. I like Notre Dame in a close one, but a very good game against Ohio State. Well, Matt Zemek, tell everybody where they can find all your great work about USC. Again, we mentioned the Get Off My Pylon podcast. Tell the audience all the other great stuff that you're doing.
Yeah, so I'm at trojanswire.usatoday.com, on Twitter at trojanswire. And one of the special pieces I wrote this week is that how bad have things gotten for Nick Saban at Alabama? A former USC defensive coordinator who failed big time under Clay Helton. His name's Todd Orlando. Yes, Todd Orlando was able to stop a Nick Saban offense. So that story is up at Trojans Wire if you want to check it out.
All right, give me last thing. I'll get you out of here. I just thought of this. Give me 30 seconds on what's the status of Bronny James at this point, mid-September.
There's no like specific report timetable laid out, but the James family released a statement expressing confidence that he would be able to play relatively soon. Now the measuring stick here is that Vince Iwuchukwu, went through the same thing that Bronny did, and Iwuchukwu, a 5-star freshman last year, he suffered cardiac arrest in July. So Bronny James, same thing. It's the same timetable. Both happened in July. So if you remember, Iwuchukwu came back. He joined the team playing a game on January 12th.
Okay.
So if Iwuchukwu is the benchmark, then Bronny James would come back, a little bit after the new year. And so it's going to be up to Isaiah Collier and Boogie Ellis to do the heavy lifting in the first month of the season. USC playing Kansas State in the opener on November 6th and Gonzaga on December 2nd. USC absolutely needs to win at least one of those 2 games in order to live up to the enormous expectations placed on that team this season.
And are you very confident that Dan Lanning and Lincoln Riley, if given the opportunity, are going to try to run it up on Deion the next 2 weeks?
I think they're just going to try and manage their teams, especially USC playing a 9 a.m. Pacific time game. Like they're thinking about winning the Pac-12 championship, not so much sticking it in Deion's eye. Keep in mind, they're not going to be coaching against Deion next year when Colorado's in the Big 12.
But they will be recruiting against them.
Yes, they will. Absolutely.
Well, Matt Zemek, awesome job, man. Great analysis on all things college football, Pac-12, obviously, and keep up the great work. And we will definitely have you on as we progress through this mega Pac-12 season. The cannibalization, hopefully it doesn't, hopefully it works out that we can get the Pac-12 in a playoff scenario late November, unlike they've had in years past. So we definitely want to see the drama of so many great quarterbacks and teams, and keep up the great work at Trojan Wire, and we'll be in touch real soon, okay?
Thank you, and have fun covering that big Florida State Clemson game.
You got it. All right, we'll be right back. Powers on Sports Podcast.